Everybody, good afternoon. I'm Neil Harris, Chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call this meeting to order for July 15th, 2026. Good to see several of you here in person in our temporary space. Thanks to the National Capital Planning Commission, one of our member organizations, for lending their space to us to meet while our space at COG completes its renovations. Our next meeting, which is in September, will be in the renovated space, and we're all looking forward to that, I'm sure. Those participating virtually, in the event of any disruption to your audio and video connection, please email or text staff. Contact information is in the email we received from Conti last week. I'll briefly review the process we'll follow for today's hybrid meeting. We'll start with a roll call of board members and confirm that we have a quorum. After that, we'll accept comments from the public. And then during our agenda items, I'll have the presenters complete their briefings, and then we'll turn to members for questions or comments. I'll first recognize members here in the room before turning to those online, and I'll ask staff to assist me to identify those online. For the actions that require a vote after the presentation, I'll move to adopt the resolution and then seek a second to my motion. After that, we'll have discussions followed by the vote. I'll call for nays or abstentions only. The rest of you present, I'll take those as a yes. Those participating virtually, please use the raised hand icon and staff will make a note and help me to call on you. All right, Lynn, can you please call the roll?
Great, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'll state your jurisdiction if you state your name, please. Also, for those people in the room, you may notice that there's a microphone in front of you. There's a little button sort of to the left on the table. If you press that, that will turn it on. Also, if you have a computer and the computer is in front of the microphone, that won't help us out. So just make sure that your computer is a little to the side. And I think that's all I need to let you all know for being in the room. So anyway, starting with the District Council, Charles Allen. District Council, Christina Henderson.
Here.
Thank you. District Council, Matt Fruman.
Here.
Thank you. District Office of Planning. District Department of Transportation.
Here.
Thank you. Moving to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County.
Present.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. City of College Park. Frederick County.
Deborah Carpenter representing the county executive.
Thank you. City of Frederick. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris.
Thank you. City of Greenbelt.
Kristen Weaver is online.
Thank you. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive.
Lori Pitts.
Thank you. Montgomery County.
Marilyn Balcom.
Thank you. Prince George's County Executive.
Victor Weisberg.
Prince George's County. City of Rockville. City of Tacoma Park. Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Corman online.
Thank you. Maryland Senate. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Jeff Anderson.
Thanks. Moving to Virginia, City of Alexandria. Arlington County.
Dan Malik is here.
No, Susan Cunningham was on her way. City of Fairfax.
Tom Peterson.
Thank you. Fairfax County.
Walter Alcorn's online.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. City of Falls Church.
Dave Snyder online.
Thank you. Loudoun County. City of Manassas.
Sonia Vasquez Luna online.
Ashley Hudson.
Thank you. City of Manassas Park. Prince William County.
Megan Landis, present.
Virginia House of Delegates. Virginia Senate.
Jennifer Boysko online.
Thank you. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Bill Cutler here.
Thank you. WMATA.
Mark Phillips here.
Thanks. So there you are. Hi, Mark. Our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Mean Ash online.
Thank you. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission.
Michael Weil here.
Thank you. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority.
Brian Washington present.
Thank you. And National Park Service. All right, that concludes roll call. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Now for public comments. Lynn, if there are any members who signed up to speak in person, please recognize them first.
There have been no folks signing up to speak and no public comments online either, and those materials are posted for the record.
All right, thank you, Lynn. We'll move to the second item on our agenda, which is approval of the minutes of the June 17th, 2026 meeting. We have been provided with a written summary. Let's see, I'll move that we adopt the minutes of the June 17th, 2026 meeting. May I have a second?
Second.
Thanks. That was Matt Fruman. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll take the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions? All right, the minutes are adopted. Next up is the technical committee report. We have a written summary of the July 1st, 2026 meeting. Dan, is there anything you'd like to highlight or expand for us?
Good afternoon. The technical committee had a lengthy July 1st meeting with a full agenda. In the interest of brevity, I'll only mention a few of the highlights. For adoption. These usefully provide a baseline framework for all our myriad transit agencies and the public to communicate and plan using the same language, so to speak. It's encouraging to see that progress on DMV moves. That item fed elegantly into a briefing on the 2025 State of Public Transportation Report, which was an always fascinating snapshot with a lot of data for the technical committee to digest. We particularly found the slide about different agencies' revenue sources to be especially educational. In terms of information-only items that aren't in front of the whole board today, the committee continued to receive more data on air quality and emission standards. We received a very useful update from TPB staff on workflow guidance for future tip updates that should make that process easier for everyone to understand. And committee member Carson Lucarelli from Alexandria gave us a presentation about Alex Moves, Alexandria's local resident transportation survey, which they use in addition to the TPB's regional survey. And several committee members were interested in Alexandria's data about mode of access to grocery stores, which isn't typically measured in other surveys. So that was really fascinating information. With that, unless there are questions, that concludes my report.
All right, are there any questions for Dan? All right, thank you. Now it's time for the Community Advisory Committee report. We have a written summary of the July 9th meeting. Tim Davis, is there anything you'd like to highlight or expand for us?
Afternoon, Chair Harris, members of the TPB board and staff. I'm excited to share with you the CAC's monthly report from our July 9th meeting. The committee received a very thorough briefing on the National Capital Region Bike and Pedestrian Plan from Transportation Planner Mike Farrell. That plan was last updated in 2022. After the presentation, the committee began a question and answer discussion. Details are included in your report. Some of the notable items are as follows. Does the plan address safety for the many users on the trails with respect to enforcement? The plan will address that. On the park maintained trails, there are park police. In addition to police, there are trail rangers and volunteers. And the plan will also encourage the use of trail markings and wayfinding and signage. Regarding funding for trails on the capital side, one of the best ways to get trails installed is through the new development process, and that's something that all of the CAC people are involved in the new development process. As you all know, COG has technical assistance like land use connections and TAP. Is there a general statement in the plan about land use and how compact land use is better for pedestrians and bicyclists? The answer to that was there are TPB adopted policies as part of the vision plan, but this plan can look at writing something about compact development patterns supporting bicycling and walking. Our DMV Moves planner, Pierre, briefed the committee on the working group's currently implementing the initiatives detailed in the action plan for regional transit integration. And due to the lengthy discussion from the bicycle and pedestrian plan, the committee was not able to receive the full information at that time. We will revisit more of DMV Moves update in September. In our Act Locally Round Robin, members continue to act in several transportation initiatives around the region, including the redesign of H Street, community action on the WMATA Better Bus implementation, and writing transportation articles for a local newspaper. I invite TPB members to read the CAC report for more details about our discussion. That wraps up my report. I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions for Tim? All right. Thank you, Tim. Now let's.
Thank you.
Next up is the item number 5, the steering committee actions and report of the director. We have a copy of Conti's written report. Will you please give us a review, Conti?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'll try to be brief as I review the contents of my memo, but be happy to answer any questions. I'll start with the steering committee. The steering committee met on July 1st, and it took a couple of actions, primarily responding to a request from Montgomery County. It amended the TPB's TIP with 3 projects. The first amendment added a net of about $7 million in federal STBG and local funds for the Montgomery County's Dennis Avenue Bridge Replacement Project. In the second amendment, it added about $5.8 million in federal bridge investment program and local funds for its Garrett Park Road Bridge project. And lastly, in the third amendment, it added about $5 million in federal STBG and local funds for a new bridge project on the Green Tree Road. The details of these are on pages 2 through 13. Moving to the letters sent and received section of my memo, on page 15 is a copy of the TPB's letter of support for Prince William County's application seeking federal infra grant funds for its Old Bridge Road and Garden Boulevard intersection improvements. Moving to the announcements and updates section, on page 17 is a memo from your staff, Robert Dabity, providing information about the new motor vehicle emissions budgets. These are the emission limits that are established by the EPA that the TPB has to conform with when it adopts its long-range plan. Members will recall from past briefing that the region had attained the federal air quality standards for the 2015 ozone, primarily VOC and NOx, having previously been in non-attainment. So now that we were in non-attainment and we have now attained the standards, federal requirement is we have to submit a maintenance plan showing how the region will maintain in its attainment of the standards for the next 10 years. That is the maintenance plan. And included in the maintenance plan, amongst a bunch of commitments, one of them is the maximum amount of VOC and NOx emissions that this region will have over the next 10 years from its automobiles. That is what the TPB has to conform with. So in the memo, you will see the proposed amounts of VOC and NOx emissions that we have developed working with the state DOTs and with the state environmental agencies. A special meeting of the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee is being convened on July 22nd, a week from today, where the committee will be asked to review the draft maintenance plan, including the motor vehicle emissions budgets, and approve it to be released for public comments and a public hearing. After that, it'll be completed and submitted by the 2 governors and the mayor to the US EPA. and we will then await US EPA approval. That's the process for that. And we thank the DOTs and the environmental agencies at the state level for working with us over the past 8-9 months on this. On page 19, you will find a brief update of some of the recent transportation-related legislations in Virginia, Maryland, and DC that went into effect July 1. I'll just draw your attention to that, and if there's an interest in getting a more detailed briefing on it, we'll be happy to schedule it for another day. And the last item in the packet is a copy of the TPB's Commuter Connections Employer Awards brochure that is recognizing various employers and transportation agency programs for their contribution to promoting travel by carpool, vanpool, transit, walk and bike. I want to particularly thank Vice Chair Kenny Kagure, who served as the Master of Ceremonies at the event at the National Press Club, and City of Gaithersburg's Deputy Manager Tom Lenegren Seeger handed out the awards in the absence of you, Mr. Chair. I thank them both and congratulations to the award winners as well. Before I conclude, I want to recognize Board Member Dave Snyder, chairs the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee. It's one of the many hats he wears in this region. So, Mr. Snyder, if there's anything you want to add about MVAC or the maintenance plan, I would welcome you to do that. Thanks.
Really, thank you, Conti. Really, it's for everyone here in the public. This is a very, very important initiative. It comes as a result of really great work on the part of the region to bring us into attainment. But having been there, we now need very much to maintain it. And so we look forward to providing a plan, getting public input, and moving forward. But again, the only reason why we're here is because we paid attention to reducing emissions as well as developing and expanding our region. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Mr. Snyder, and thanks, Conti. For next item up is Chairman's remarks. So first of all, I'd like to thank Vice Chair Fruman for leading the meeting last month while I was returning from the Maryland Municipal League Conference. I was able to listen in from the car to some good discussions, especially about VDOT Southside 495 Express Lanes project, and I'm sure that we'll hear more about that in future meetings. The next meeting in September will be back in our home space at the COG building after its renovation. There will be a formal event on September 9th, a ribbon cutting of the new space at 11:30, right before the next COG board meeting. We as members of the TPB are invited to the event. Some of us also sit on the COG board because you can never be in too many meetings. So please keep that date and time on your calendars. You can meet other elected officials on the COG board and on the Air Quality Committee. Lots of former board members and staff as well. And now it's time to get on with the action items. Number 7 on the agenda is the FY 2027 Maryland Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program project approvals. Jamie Buffkin on staff will present us with the recommendations of the Selection Committee on awarding federal transportation alternative set-aside programs, or TAP, for projects in Maryland. The TPB has a responsibility to select projects, and we do this for Maryland, Virginia, and the district separately at different times. Today is Maryland's turn. After the briefing, we'll be asked to adopt Resolution R1-2027. Jamie?
Hello, members of the board. I'm Jamie Buffkin, and I've been working with John Swanson, the consultant for this, to work on this year's Maryland's Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Program, while Vicky Cadulo has been out on parental leave. Oh. One moment, the clicker is not working. Thank you. So today I will give you a quick background on the program, walk you through the selection process, and then explain this year's funding recommendations. So for those who are not familiar with TAP, it's a federal formula program that provides funding to projects that are considered to be alternatives to traditional highway construction projects. Large MPOs like the TPB are sub-allocated funds and are given responsibility for selecting projects in their region. And I also want to add that during this year's MDOT cycle, they did not consider our region's unfunded applications in their allocation for statewide funding. This is a difference compared to prior years. So just keep that in mind. So if we decided to not go with a project, they would then not choose to consider those projects to fund with their own funding. Next slide, please. One moment. Yeah. So while they're getting that fixed, I'll walk you through this year's TAP selection process. So to select projects with the TPB sub-allocated funding, a selection panel was put together, and this typically includes staff from DDOT, VDOT, and the TPB. So MDOT staff were also there to serve as a technical resource to provide additional context to the projects. And so each member of the panel then scored the projects individually based on their own professional assessment of the projects and also considerations of different regional values that we have listed for them in their score sheet. And so beyond these regional criteria, the panel also considered the construction on the right-of-way, the project readiness, and full utilization of the sub-allocation, and also keeping in mind the inability to partially fund projects. So these were other overarching considerations in addition to the regional criteria. And so the panelist scores were used as a basis for discussion, but the final recommendations were based on conversations and overall consensus. And, oh no, thank you. And so this year, 6 applications were received, totaling $4.5 million in requested funds. However, the budget for TPB sub-allocation this year was $2 million, making the process competitive. And so a little background on these projects. 2 of these projects were large construction projects accounting for roughly 85% of these requested funds. And then the remaining 4 projects were smaller and non-infrastructure projects. And so after discussions, the panel is recommending that all $2 million be used to fund one project this year, and that is the Heritage Triangle Trail Phase 1 from Dr. Bird Road and Norwood Road Shared Use Path in Montgomery County. And Montgomery County will be providing a 20% match of $615,000. And then MDOT has agreed to fund the remaining $460,000 through statewide allocation because this project's requests surpassed the $2 million. And so MDOT is going to come in and help secure those remaining monies. And so I'm going to provide more details on this project in the next slide. But before I do, I want to provide more background information on what led to this decision, because the panel was ultimately made to decide to either A, fund the largest project only, which, again, the cost exceeded the TPB suballocation, but we did have assurances from MDOT that they would cover that remaining cost. Or B, the panel could have funded the other large construction project along with most of the other small projects, but that would leave some money on the table. Or C, fund all of the smaller projects and leave even more money on the table. And so this project was selected, but the remaining 5 projects did meet the selection criteria to varying degrees. So one was the second largest project. It was also a construction project. However, it was determined that it was not ready for implementation, and there was concern about the funds being used in a timely manner. And then funding for the 4 remaining smaller projects was also another option, but the panel didn't want to leave roughly $1.3 million on the table. And so there's also concerns that some scopes did not meet the funding requested, or that a large chunk of their requested funds would be deemed ineligible for funding. And so with that, the panel chose this project as it was the only one that proved to be ready for implementation with 100% designs complete, in addition to the merits of the project itself. And also with much uncertainty around the security of federal grant programs, and with an emphasis from DOT on implementation, the panel felt that it would be important to use all the money, all the suballocations. And so now more about the project. The funding will be used to construct 2 segments of 10-foot wide shared use paths, totaling about 3,800 feet. And this is going to complete a separated bike path that exists now on Maryland 108 to Ednor Road. It also includes intersection improvements, ADA upgrades, and the trail is part of a larger heritage trail network, which is planned to connect 4 heritage tourism destinations. And it's going to provide safer bike ped access to 3 schools. And it's going to allow nearby residents to safely access businesses along the larger trail system. Next slide, please. And so with that, TPB staff recommend the board vote to adopt R1 2027 to provide funding for the construction of this trail segment. Thank you, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Jamie. So first of all, I move that we, resolution R1-2027 to approve projects for funding under the Federal Transportation Alternatives Set Aside Program for Suburban Maryland for FY 2027. May I have a second?
Second.
All right, thanks, Matt Fruman. Are there any questions or discussion on the motion? Anyone in the room or online? All right, thank you, Jamie. Time for the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Thanks. Next up is item number 8, approval and performance measures and targets for VOC and NOx targets. Last month, our staff, Robert Debatey, briefed us on the federal requirement for the TPB to adopt targets to reduce VOC and NOx emissions over the next 2 and 4 years. We are to adopt these this month. So before we consider adopting Resolution R2-2027, let's hear from Robert on any updates.
All right. Thank you to members of the board. Today's presentation, as was mentioned, is a continuation of last month's that was given on the performance measures for targets for on-road VOC and NOx emission reductions from CMAQ-funded projects. Lots of qualifiers there. The performance metric is one of the many that fall under the federally mandated performance-based planning and programming effort that began in 2018. It is important to note that the MPO must adopt targets for the upcoming 2026 to 2029 performance period in order to comply with these federal planning requirements. Next slide, please. Today's presentation will be very brief. We'll go quickly over the federal requirements for these emission targets. We'll look briefly at the goals of the TPB and where this fits in with them, and then we'll go through what the proposed targets are. Next slide, please. So looking at the overall requirements for this metric, it's a data-driven set of 2 and 4 year cumulative targets that we set every 4 years. What the target is specifically is the sum of the 2 and 4 year emission reductions of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and nitrous oxides, or NOx, from CMAQ funded projects as recorded in the CMAQ public access system. That last qualifier is actually very important. The CMAQ public access system as a database has some idiosyncrasies that affect the 2 and the 4 year targets, and we reflected those in when we were developing the targets that we're presenting today. The main thing to note is that projects receiving CMAQ funding for multiple years, only the annual emissions benefit is only recorded in the first year of the project. All subsequent years are left blank. Also, for small projects, they can be recorded as qualitative and therefore would not contribute to the 2 to 4 year targets. Next slide, please. So this primary slide for the presentation, this shows both our past performance and our future targets that we are proposing today. The past performance values, data from the CMAQ public access system, was downloaded for the years 2022 through 2025. The states were contacted to verify the data was correct. And any changes or corrections that are pending with the FHWA are reflected in these numbers. So this is not a one-for-one comparison to the CMAQ public access system. You can see that we exceeded our targets and we significantly exceeded our 4 year targets. This was due to Maryland and DC adding new projects after the original targets were set. These projects are TDM, or travel demand management projects, specifically commuter connections and Go DC Go. While a typical CMAQ project might have a benefit of 1 to 3 or even less kilograms per day benefit, the TDM projects that we mentioned here have reductions of between 40 and 200 kilograms per day. Because of this, the addition of these TDM projects are what allowed us to exceed our 4 year targets. The 2 right-hand columns show the proposed 2 and 4 year targets for the upcoming 2026 to 2029 performance period. The targets presented here are identical to the draft ones that were presented last month. The MPO targets are the sum of the individual state targets as supplied to us by the DOTs. Both Maryland and Virginia were able to give us a list of projects along with their VOC and NOx reductions. Those were summed up to get us the benefits for those states. In the case of DC, they're still in the selection process for the CMAQ projects. So what we did in that case is we looked at the past performance values for them. So using their 2022 through 2025 targets or performance, we applied those as the targets for the rest of the performance period. You may notice that our 4 year targets are actually a little less than the performance we had in the past period. This comes down to an adjustment that Maryland made to one of their projects for commuter connections. They actually added a 31% reduction in what they thought their emission reductions will be compared to the last performance period. This was to account to changes in the performance of the program, and also to take into account the fact that as cars get cleaner in the future, one trip off the road as a result of commuter connections is going to be slightly less going forward into the future. And with that, we recommend, or staff recommends, the adoption of resolution R2-2027, and I'll happily answer any questions.
All right, thanks, Robert. First, move the resolution R2-2027 to approve the VOC and NOx targets for 2 and 4 year periods noted. May I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Matt. Are there any questions or discussion on the motion? Anyone in the room or online? All right. So now we'll take the vote. Are there any nays or abstentions? Very quiet group today. That's a good thing. Motion passes. Thanks, Robert. Now it's time for the informational items. Item number 9 is the DMV Move Services Guidelines. In January, we adopted a resolution accepting the request from the DMV Moves Task Force to serve as the lead coordinator for all involved transit agencies to work on a plan to implement the recommendations for a regionally integrated bus service system. Our staff has been working on this since then, and today we'll be briefed on 2 of those recommendations. We'll be asked to act on one of these items at our next meeting in September. Eric Randall on our staff will brief us as he is joined by Ms. Jordan Holt of WMATA. Eric?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm told that our technology is now working, so let me test it here. A 3-second delay. I am pointing it in the correct direction, yes? All right, well, I guess we'll carry on with our troubleshooting here. So I will say next slide when the time comes. So we'll stop right there. Slide, okay, thank you. So this is a 2-part presentation today. I'll be speaking to the first half, recapping the DMV Moves plan for everyone's information and talking about the service guidelines. Then Ms. Holt will take over and wrap up the service guidelines and talk about the really hard parts, which are the performance and reporting. So we'll be covering all that in detail and then next steps. And as the chair already noted, we will be coming back in September. So next slide, please. So just to remind everyone, DMV Moves Regional Transit Initiative took place over 2024 and 2025, leading to the approval of the DMV Moves plan in November of last year by the COG and Metro boards acting jointly. Calls for the region's governments, transit agencies, transit providers, planning organizations to take action to improve regional integration. Much of that plan talked about the need for funding, especially for Metro, but the second half of that plan was the detailed action plan for regional transit integration, and you can see the cover of that second half of the plan there. The COG and Metro boards asked for TPB to take certain actions in support of this plan. We briefed the board at the end of the year and in January. And in January, the TPB passed the resolution, also a snapshot of it there, accepting the charges placed upon it by COG and Metro boards and for staff to take action in support. One of those actions is there in bold italics, which is that the TPB is to adopt regional service guidelines, creating consistent expectations for customers across jurisdictions. And this is one of 6 areas for detailed regional transit integration in the DMV Moves plan. Next slide, please. So I'm here today to talk about regional bus guidelines, which is how we've been working to implement these recommended integration actions. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of words on this in some of the next slides. I'll try to break it slowly without getting too far into the weeds. But why is this one of the 6 actions recommended under the DMV integration? Why set regional guidelines? A couple reasons, but the goal is to create a framework for connecting transit routes, starting with bus routes and eventually all transit together consistently for customers, so that a traveler or customer in Loudoun County experiences the same level of transit service as a customer in, say, Prince George's County. So we need a regional set of guidelines so that as planners across the region look at how transit is structured and the service that is provided, working internally with operations and planning, we can come up with a consistent external set of product or service, if you will, for our customers and travelers. So the regional guidelines are designed to set those expectations that everybody in our region should get an equitable level of transit service, though there will also be local needs, and we need the flexibility for those. By having a consistent set of guidelines, service planners from different agencies can work together to promote that sort of consistent level of service. If we have a consistent level of service, customers should have more understanding and confidence of what transit they're getting. And ideally, if they have confidence in that system, they'll ride transit more. And of course, there's always interest in transparency and accountability as transit planners work for their counties, cities, boards, whoever that may be. How do we evaluate, are we providing that consistent, regionally consistent level of service? Guidelines provides a framework against which we can be evaluated. So we'll talk about that in even more detail. But at this point, I'm going to quote our TPB technical chair, who said that it's easy for people to understand what an interstate freeway is, but it's harder to understand what a good bus line is. So again, what we're trying to do here is explain what a good bus line is. Next slide, please. So developing the guidelines has been the work of a working group of regional transit providers that both met last year in the DMV Moves effort that was approved and has been meeting again bi-weekly since March. And I'll just pause here to say thank you to all the regional planners who've been working on these working groups. It requires an additional commitment of time and effort and investment. We've had some really great conversations. Jordan's actually been chairing most of the meetings, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit more about it. Returning to the presentation. So what were the guidelines? Various proposals out there. This is what has been developed over the past really couple years. A lot of this was in the initial DMV Moves integration action plan, but we've continued to refine it as we consider how to actually implement it. So this is always will be a work in progress, I think. And I am going to talk about this more on the next slide. So if it gets a little confusing at this point, it all will hopefully be explained. So how do we define transit service? How do we know if it's a good bus line? First thing was we looked at land use. Some people talk about land use and transportation as yin and yang, or one without the other is like one hand clapping. Transportation has to suit the land use context. So that was the first element of what we did for these guidelines. Then we looked at the sort of transit service we provide, and we divided it up into core, coverage, peak, and of course, other. Core bus service is that bus service running all day long in heavily used corridors. Coverage is the bus service that reaches out to make sure, especially in more spread out areas, that we're providing transit service to people who need it across the region. Peak hour, again, kind of goes back to that even more the commute to the work commute that so many people obviously ride the bus for, what level of service that should be. And then other is the bus service that doesn't quite fit in any of those three buckets, but we wanted to look at it as well. So again, what is a good bus service? We came up with two criteria: span or hours per day. Does the bus run from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., 5 a.m. to midnight, or 24/7? And then how often does the bus come? Every half hour, every hour, or every 15 minutes, or every 5 minutes? Again, this will be explained a little better on tables, just trying to recap it for you. But we took all those things, the 3, the 4, the 2, and put them together in a framework that you'll see on the next slides. There's a lot of concern over about how the guidelines, and when we get to them, the performance measures will be used. So I'll also be talking about use statement. Again, transit planners want to provide context for how these guidelines and the performance measures will be used. So we'll cover that as well. So next slide, please. So to make it simple, here's that first metric, if you will, activity tiers. We chose not to name these. You could name them something like urban, suburban, exurban, but with activity centers across the region, each activity center is typically like an activity tier 1. So we're just calling them 1, 2, and 3 for now. And I think everybody can intuitively understand this. A more dense location, higher density of population, higher density of employment, higher density of points of interest, as we call the places that people want to go to for entertainment or medical services or food, everything else. Higher density, more service. You get a little further out, not so much density, more single family homes. You need bus service as well. And then activity 3, you may have some pretty far flung areas. Our region is actually quite large geographically, all the way from the northern part of Frederick County to the southern part of Prince William County. You may not have a bus service that's more coverage oriented and only runs every hour and may not even run on the weekends. So again, that land use to transportation connection, these are our 3 activity tiers. Next slide, please. So of course, this all comes together in sort of a matrix. So hopefully I've broken down a little bit. So again, you have those 3 tiers of land use across the top, and those are some measures to divide up the 3 tiers. Then on the left-hand side, we have those 4 types of bus routes. The core routes all day long, main arteries, if you will, coverage routes that circulate through residential communities, peak routes, even more frequent bus, but on very specific locations, and then other routes, we're not setting standards for those. So the idea is if you're downtown DC on a core route, like say on 16th Street Northwest or what have you, you would have bus service running at least 16 hours per day. That's that span of service, and a bus at least every 15 minutes. Ideally, you may well have bus service that's better than that, but this is a guideline for what we would regard as the minimum acceptable level of service to meet our regional service guidelines. On the other hand, if you're out in an exurban location, tier 3, fairly spread out land use, you may only have bus service 10 hours per day and a bus only once an hour. So again, this is a framework, putting it all together, ideas that we can categorize all of the bus routes in the region against one of these intersections on the table, and use that as a standard for evaluating the approximately 400 or so bus routes we have in this region. So next slide, please. So moving back from the table and the numbers on it all, how would these guidelines be used? So 5 principles here. Again, we're talking about what the guidelines, those numbers on the chart, what the guidelines are and what they aren't. So how would we be used? So letter A there, guidelines set expectations. Expectations is that broad word. Again, going back to why we have guidelines in the first place, so that customers can expect a certain level of transit service, based on their land use density, where they're going, their surrounding land use environment, but they should be able to get a certain level of bus service that they're to experience. So then transit agency staff under letter B will use this information, internally to design or structure service, making sure that when bus services connect between agencies or at certain transfer points, the service is provided consistently against the guidelines. And again, when we measure or look at the guidelines, it helps us identify and prioritize where we're providing decent transit. So under letter C, transit staff planners, we obviously are all operating under a financial constraint. We need to consider trade-offs between meeting these guidelines as well as other local priorities or standards for network accessibility. For instance, if you have a housing development, you might need more transit service there than the guidelines would require you to have. In other areas where 2 corridors closely parallel, that are fairly dense, you may not need as much transit service as in the guidelines. Again, we have to make those trade-offs and consistencies. So letter D, we're considering external priorities, internal priorities as transit planners. So not all routes will meet the guidelines, but again, it helps us identify compared to peer agencies, other agencies, as planners communicate and coordinate transit service across the region, are we meeting the guidelines? It just sets a basic level of framework. And of course, the guidelines and also the performance measures will help us track adherence. Are we meeting those guidelines? is the level of investment adequate? It goes back to the whole point of performance measurement, even back to the previous presentation. What gets measured gets managed. So if we measure, are we meeting the guidelines, it helps us all manage the transit service we're providing. So when we consider the guidelines and the performance measures, if service is not meeting guidelines or if it's exceeding guidelines, it raises the questions for us. How? Why? It helps us make the case for analysis investment. So again, these are guidelines. They're not rigorous code. We can't go out and make transit agencies, absolutely meet every guideline. They are guidelines, not necessarily standards. So next slide, please. So we will be bringing back this chart at the right there to you all on September 16th for your approval in a resolution. It's also our goal to have the resolution include that use statement for the guidelines to set the sort of appropriate context in which the guidelines would be used. Local transit agencies across the region, again, part of DMV Moves, will be asked to adopt these guidelines. They could adopt them formally. They can include them in one of the transit strategic plans or transit development plans that transit agencies produce every several years. They could even issue internal guidance, as long as everybody agrees that this is what we're trying to provide for bus service across the region, and also interacting with other transit providers in the region, our Metro Rail provider, the commuter rail operators, and someday soon our light rail operator. Again, the TPB resolution will also hopefully serve as a template for local agencies to follow, which is why it'll be important for your adoption. I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Holt. Again, Ms. Holt's actually been the chair leading our working group, so she might have some more comments to add, and then she'll get into the really interesting bits about performance measurement. So next slide, please. Take it away.
Thanks, Eric. So this should look familiar because this is the third time you've seen it in the slide deck. But basically, Metro has, our board has adopted updated service guidelines for Metro Bus that incorporate these regional guidelines that the working group established and that were included in the action plan. So our board endorsed the DMV Moves action plan in November. And then in June, we passed an update. They adopted these updated guidelines. You'll see, we adopted the updated service classifications. We also added an additional one called Major Core. This reflects that a portion of our service runs at about 12-minute or better frequency in kind of our major corridors. So I've added that as well. But have the whole tier framework, and we've kind of redefined our tiers to align with the methodology that the working group recommended. And then we've also aligned our guidelines with the hours of service and the frequency. And now, kind of speaking to the use guidelines, we're starting to use these guidelines the use statement, we're starting to use these guidelines internally. So we have a multi-year service plan that we publish as part of our proposed budget every fall. And so we're basing our update to that multi-year service plan for bus using these guidelines. So we're looking at where we are meeting the guidelines and where we aren't. And as we identify kind of efficiencies in our schedule or efficiencies as we advance bus priority projects and identify funds that we can reinvest or resources that we can reinvest, this helps us prioritize where we can reinvest those resources. We also kind of have a commitment to transparency, and you'll see as this next part of the presentation as we discuss the regional performance measures, but we'll also be reporting out on how well our routes adhere to these guidelines. It's something we've done for the past few years, and we'll continue to do that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so now regional performance measures. You can go to the next slide. So the same working group members, which include kind of great representation of planners across all regional operators. We started this effort kind of last spring in March of 2025, where we really focused on the guidelines, and then reconvened this March to focus more on the regional performance measures, as well as wrap some things up about the guidelines, particularly the use statement. So really what we're trying to do is identify a common set of performance measures that we can all track and share data and report on regionally, both to improve kind of transparency and transit decision-making across the region. And these performance measures will then feed into TPB's annual State of Public Transportation report. So that's kind of the method that we'll use to report on these. So as Eric mentioned, it has been a very rigorous set of meetings. We meet every other week. We have our next meeting tomorrow, but have really made substantial progress and are looking at wrapping this up in the fall with kind of a formal recommendation, written recommendation of what the performance measures are. And I will say it has been, I've been very pleasantly surprised at how easy it has been to get consensus. So what you see over on the right, we pretty quickly coalesced around a set of performance measures that both speak to kind of network performance. So how well are all of our bus operators, our metro rail system, our commuter rail system, our commuter bus system work together to deliver transportation to the region. As well as a set of measures that we think are more appropriate to look at by mode or by agency or by route or by corridor, that also speak to kind of how well we are serving the region's needs in terms of public transportation. So we've identified these measures and then are continuing some conversations around kind of specific definitions for them, the data sources, how we're going to be sharing that information, and kind of what kind of context we'll need to provide as we share the data with each other to help us understand and communicate the results. Next slide, please. One of the first things we did was to clarify kind of who the audience for these measures are, and that also really fed into our use statement. So we identified kind of 3 core audiences: transit agency leadership, kind of the broader public, and elected officials. Clearly, some measures kind of resonate with some audiences more than others, but we wanted to make sure that we had all of these audiences covered. We also really look to leverage industry best practice and any data standards that already exist. So that means looking to the National Transit Database to leverage kind of TCRP Transit Cooperative Research Program reports. One was recently released, the Transit Capacity and Quality of Service Manual. So kind of looking at what some of the standards are and building on that. As I mentioned, kind of I think we'll need about 2 more substantive discussions to align around the definitions of some of the performance measures. And then we'll wrap it up with written recommendations this fall, kind of that outline for each measure, kind of how we're going to measure it, what the data source is, when we're going to provide it, how we're going to provide the context, all of that. So the details. Next slide, please. We also found it really important to develop use measures per performance measures and have kind of 4 key principles here. The first is kind of what we think, what performance measures are good for. So they're really good at communicating the different role different modes play in working together as a network to serve our region. So we want to make sure that we're covering that in the performance measures we recommend and in how they're reported. We also recommend looking at trends over time, because that can really speak to the impact of the investments that we're making as a region into our network. We thirdly couldn't overemphasize how important context is in kind of understanding some of the differences when we look at differences between modes, as well as differences between agencies or differences even between corridors. One example I often like to use is Metro. We have our own police force. So that really has a big impact on our operating costs. when we try and compare our operating costs to other agencies around the US, around the world, around the region, kind of that's really important context to understand that performance measure. And that kind of gets back to the looking at trends over time. So some ways to get around that are looking at kind of trends over time. While kind of relative values may be different across agencies, modes, corridors, routes, looking at trends over time can help you kind of tease out some of the changes and impacts. And that also speaks to the last measure, or the last point here, which is that, you know, each agency does have some uniqueness around the way that it is funded and designed to operate. And so understanding that context as we are kind of reporting out these performance measures is often where the value lies. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next steps here are on the service guideline side to continue adoption at the agency level. I mentioned, you know, Metro's one where we have a formal board adoption of our guidelines, but that's not the case across all agencies. So each agency will kind of follow its own path in that way. And then kind of to implement and use the guidelines in regional reporting. You may have noticed that one of the performance measures that we're recommending as a group is our adherence to the frequency guidelines. So that's something that kind of we'll incorporate in the annual State of Public Transportation report. On the performance measure side, we mentioned that we're looking to wrap up the work of the working group in the fall and to kind of finalize our recommendations around the performance measures and the methodologies and the definitions. We will have some kind of regular touch points to see if there's any kind of advancement in this area that we want to incorporate kind of going forward. And then we'll continue to evolve in how we're sharing data and how it's being reported.
Next slide, please. So just to close out that part of the presentation, while we've made great progress this year and we've basically reached agreement, it's going to be a multi-year effort to implement these guidelines and the performance measures. Do we collect the right data? How do we collect that data? Do we have the internal processes and technology at the agency level? In some cases, contractual agreements specify performance and may need to be reviewed. You know, do we have the staff support for all these things? And then how can we analyze and distill that information for decision makers and for the public? So again, it's going to be a continuous process over the next several years to refine and enhance these guidelines and implement these performance measures. So just to frame that expectation out there. But for the TPB, here we are, July 15th, briefing the regional bus service guidelines. We'll come back to the September meeting and ask for your approval of those guidelines and the accompanying use statement. And again, hopefully that will serve as a template for local transit agencies across the region to adopt the guidelines as well. Just speaking to other DMV Moves activities, again, this is only one of the 6 areas in the Regional Integration Action Plan. 5 other efforts are also advancing as well at various speeds. We, as required in the DMV Moves plan, as accepted by the TPB back in January, staff will be putting together an annual progress report. Our goal is to bring that initial progress report to you in November. And part of that report will also include some of those performance measures we talked about, though as well, our next presentation will also cover some of those performance measures. Besides the annual progress report in November, another one of the 6 areas is the 7-corridor bus priority network that was approved as part of the DMV Moves plan, stretching across the region. We've been very busy working on that, continuing to work on that over the next several months. We'll be bringing a bus priority network plan. You know, what would it take to implement that bus priority network plan over the next essentially 8 years, which was a charge of DMV Moves, and bring that information to you all for your review in November as well. So lots to look forward to with respect to DMV Moves. Next slide, please. So that concludes the presentation, and Jordan or myself will be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. That was some impressive work. Thanks for all the hard work that this working group has been doing. Are there any questions or discussions?
If I may, all super impressive, and I'm new to this, so it could be that this is like an awkward question, but I mean, in a certain sense, we have a kind of balkanized system where we have a bunch of different systems around the region. And maybe it is in the final bullet point that you get at this, but this would measure how each of those systems was doing as a separate entity. And then there is a different project of how they stitch together to serve the region as a whole. And maybe that's the bus priority network, but is that also a work stream? How are folks who are working in this area thinking about having a bunch of great local systems, but ensuring that they work together to serve the region as best as possible?
I mean, I would say that's the whole point of the DMV Moves Regional Integration Action Plan is to, yeah, well, stepping back, I would say the pandemic and local priorities, have affected how transit agency staff cooperate and coordinate between the different providers. I think particularly with the pandemic and changes in staffing and however the focus became on pandemic, a lot of that regional coordination sort of withered away. So now with the Regional Integration Action Plan and DMV Moves, this is how we're working together across all 6 areas to get everybody to go, okay, let's work together. Let's set a regional set of guidelines or regional fares, or have a bus priority network that helps connect the region across multiple jurisdictions and multiple providers. So we're working to sort of stitch everybody back together again, if that helps. And so the guidelines are, one, respect for bus service levels, is Loudon Bus, Dash, ART, Fairfax, Metrobus, providing consistent levels of service for those appropriate activity tiers of land use context. So we're trying to get everybody back to like, this is what makes sense for the region. Sometimes we've got to break out of our cylinder of excellence and put the plan together. Now, does that mean where the bus priority network that you're going to see in November, that's more focused on the capital street level, transit signal priority, dedicated bus lanes, what would be possible if we had that across the region? It's not necessarily tied to any individual one agency or one operator. It's meant to be for every operator that uses those corridors, if that helps a bit. I'm sure Conti has something to add here too.
Just expanding on that and to your question, the service guidelines is, the whole point is to make transit a seamless and consistent experience so that it could become one of the preferred modes of travel, right, for whatever purposes. So that's the end goal. So the service guidelines will help those 13 different operators design their own service to meet the needs of their own community, but provide that regional consistent expectation that wherever I'm living, or I might be living in Charles County, but I might have traveled to Fairfax County, but when I come there, my expectation for bus service will be similar to what I have there, right? So that is only on that part. But how do you make it very seamless? How do you make it very convenient where it becomes a preferred mode of travel? There are other elements, and those are the 6 other groups that Eric talked about. For example, right now, what is children under what age ride for free? That's not the same. So in your jurisdiction, it might be 14. In somebody else's jurisdiction, it might be 12. So could we then have the same thing, do that, something like that? What is the transit subsidy for lower income riders? Different thresholds in different services. Can that be streamlined, right? And then there are also recommendations about procurement. Is there cost efficiencies to be gained by pooling the procurement? They all need more or less same things, if not on the bus, if not on the vehicle, the maintenance, the upkeep, the operations. Is there opportunities to pool the resources and do joint procurement? So there are multiple set of recommendations that the 6 groups are working on, and that is through implementing all of that is one way of trying to get to that seamless experience. There is also the last point I'll make. Currently, I think Jordan touched on it and Eric touched on it a little bit. When these different bus services are operating, Eric said one example might be there might be a community that is bordered by 2 core routes, and therefore they could conceivably have a little less frequent than what the guidelines is, right? But it also, the other aspect of that is one service ending its service where another one begins. That coordination, if those routes are the core routes, and if they are meeting the guidelines that they're operating every 15 minutes, then there are increased opportunities for them to coordinate the service hours so that you are not dropped off at the border of your jurisdiction and then you have to wait 15 minutes, that sort of thing. So I think those are all how you can realize the end goal of this seamless experience that would allow our residents to consider making transit their preferred mode of choice.
Conti, can I just add one really quick note
Yeah.
specific to the material you just saw? So they reviewed the service guidelines, but Jordan also talked about some of the performance measures. And a lot of those performance measures are agency specific and will be reported that way. But there were also a small set of network performance measures that will talk about how they all work as a full transit network. Things like access to jobs, the percent or the amount of population that have access to high capacity transit, frequent transit. So those will kind of help the region understand how all these different providers are working as a network.
All right. I mean, that's great. It looks like Jordan may have something that she wants to say. And I think for this piece, very, very impressive, but the economies of scale, the coordination, so you don't get off a bus at the end of the jurisdiction. How is it that we can stitch this together so that we're getting more bang out of our dollars and then are in a position to provide even thicker service than we do today? This seems like an enormous opportunity to do that. Sounds like it's being pursued in lots of different ways. And so thank you very much.
Okay, please proceed.
Yeah, just a question about how, because we heard from Metro as having already started to adopt these things. Who was in the working group? Were there representatives from some of these other regional agencies? I didn't see that, the specific agencies noted in the slides. I'm just thinking about, is that outreach, has that happened already? Is that going to happen, just to make sure that all of the individuals, there are a lot of different individual entities between all the surrounding counties, are on board with some of these ideas?
Yeah, I would say we've had representation from every operator in the region, not necessarily at every single meeting, but over time, they are all aware of it. And we certainly also discuss the guidelines in the context of other meetings as well that are taking place. So it's not just the service guidelines working group, but we have an overall coordination group of transit planners who help coordinate everything across the region or the major state-led agencies. So certainly DRPT, MTA are involved for Virginia and Maryland respectively. So there's multiple ways that we are reaching out and making sure everybody's involved. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on your comment a few minutes ago, yeah, this does lay the groundwork, I think, for some better regional coordination. Certainly, having guidelines that go across transit agencies is going to be helpful. But as we were just talking about a few minutes ago, I think it's a step towards a more cohesive and more integrated system. across the region in transit opportunities. And there's one other piece that's not coming through this process, but exists elsewhere, which is having the standards is really important, but also just keeping track of where people are actually going, and then marrying those over time is this is definitely a step towards that. So thank you.
All right, thanks. And yes, please.
Just a question about how you, I saw that one of the requests is that the transit providers adopt these guidelines as part of their operating. Is there a request of jurisdictions that don't have transit service to reference, or we're about to kick off our long range plan update, and it's a good time, but I'm not really sure what that looks like. Everybody else should do this, right? I mean, we support it, but yeah, I'm just curious if there's been discussion about how the other jurisdictions that may not have transit.
I think the focus of these guidelines has been on operations, agencies actually providing them. But, as Ms. Marks, you've been at the coordination group meeting. So I think if DDOT were to certainly consider these in their long-range transit planning and their work together with Metro, that'd be certainly something to do.
All right. That's it for the questions. Thank you very much for
Chair
the.
Harris, man,
Mr.
I just say
Phillips is up.
really quickly.
Right in.
I'll try. I just want to actually thank the members of this board and TPB staff for taking the lead in advancing coordination and making sure that we're actually implementing the action plan. Metro, as evidenced by our board's adoption of the service guidelines, stands ready to partner with all of our transit partners and lead and support where necessary. So thank you.
All right. On behalf of the organization, you're welcome. It's important work. All right. Let's move on to the last informational item for today. Item number 10 is the 2025 State of Public Transportation Report. This is a report that provides a concise overview of the state of public transportation in the National Capital Region in 2025. We've been publishing annually for some time now. Pierre Gonard of staff will brief us on this year's report.
Thank you, Chair Harris. Good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Pierre Gonard, transportation planner here at COG TPB, and I'm pleased to join you today to provide a briefing on the 2025 State of Public Transportation Report, a comprehensive annual review of transit activities in the National Capital Region. No clickers. Great. Next, yes, thank you. So it's magic. I thought I was going to have a shorter amount of time with you, but now I have the rest of the meeting. So I am going to just overwhelm you with data and information. But so the State of Public Transportation Report serves multiple functions. First, it's a means of incorporating public transportation interests into the metropolitan planning process. Second, stands as a reference of the characteristics, operations, and activities of all the transit agencies based out of the National Capital Region. And third, it's a means of promoting TPB goals by featuring local activities that are fostering affordable and convenient mobility operations, as well as livable and prosperous communities, among other goals. Beginning with this edition, the 2025 report will now serve a fourth function, which is to broadly document the performance of both agencies and the regional networks service as described by the previous presentation. And in future versions, the new content will evolve to reflect the performance metrics that are going to be approved through the DMV Moves initiative, thereby accomplishing one of TPB's new reporting obligations stemming from this board's DMV Moves resolution in January. Next slide, please. Here you see an outline of the 6 sections of the report, including what content is covered in each part. Generally, the report's analysis and summaries begin in part 1 at the regional network level and then become more nuanced and specific as you move through the report. Part 2 includes 2-page spreads for snapshots of each transit agency's overview statistics and activities. and performance metrics. Part 3 then covers public transportation or public transit services that don't fall into Part 2 profiles very neatly. So those typically include paratransit or specialty services, as well as unfinished projects like the Purple Line. Part 4 is for updates of the activities by our partner regional organizations. And Part 5 includes more in-depth coverage of planning studies, operations accomplishments, and challenges by agencies that may or may not have been referenced in Part 2. And finally, Part 6 summarizes the TPB's own work in the subject year related to public transportation. Next slide, please. Now let's dive into the report. As noted, Part 1 summarizes the state of the regional transit network as a whole. Here you can see a quick snapshot of what transit modes and services are available throughout the National Capital Region. The biggest takeaway from this list and map is that no matter where you are in the region, your local transit service can connect you to the broader public transportation network. Therefore, the plans and operations of other agencies up and downstream can have an impact on one's own customers and their individual decisions to use transit locally. So it's important to plan transit services with eyes focused both locally and regionally. No matter how focused we are on our own communities or each agency's own community, no one is really an island unto themselves. We're all connected here to one another. Next slide, please. Although the qualitative data in the report, such as information about the agency's activities in 2025, relates to the calendar year, quantitative data is mostly sourced from the National Transit Database, or NTD, which you've heard about in the previous presentation, which is published by the FTA. Much of the NTD's data has a significant lag time of about a year between reporting and publication. That means that when we prepare the State of Public Transportation report in the first half of a calendar year, we only have access via the NTD to data from the previous fiscal year. So sometimes the data in the report might seem a bit outdated, but it's also what we have the most readily accessible. It's the most readily accessible data for us. So for the 2025 report, that means that much of our quantitative data is for fiscal year 24. Here you see how transit ridership was distributed that year. On the left is a chart sorting ridership across the different available modes in our transit network. We can see that although Metro Rail carried the most passenger trips of any specific service, the vast majority of passenger trips were served by bus, whether via Metro Bus or other local operators. And on the right, you can see how those trips on bus were distributed across the various local operators and Metrobus. So, it's not surprising Metrobus is carrying 3/4 of the region's local bus trips, but the vast majority of the remaining share was served by only 3 of the local agencies: Montgomery County Ride-On, Fairfax Connector, and Alexandria Dash. Next slide, please. This chart depicts how transit ridership evolved from FY 18 to 24. Most obvious from just a quick glance at the chart is the radical drop in ridership during the fiscal year 2021 due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. As explained on this slide, there was a significant rebound in ridership between that low point and fiscal year 24. However, the overall recovery trend line, and kind of see there in the last few bars, began to plateau a little bit between FY 23 and 24. Now, again, this is the most readily accessible data we have for the report. There's also 25 data already out there, which shows a greater jump in ridership due to more return to office mandates. So we expect to see that in the next edition of the report. And worth noting also is that for local bus ridership, which is highlighted here in green, you can see an aggregate share close to pre-pandemic years already in fiscal year 24, but the agency to agency experience was very different, with some operators experiencing significant growth in their ridership, in part due to fare-free policies and network redesigns, and other agencies which were still sort of trudging, trying to get that ridership back to their service. Next slide, please. Here we see how regional and local bus assets are distributed across the tri-state area. Metrobus, serving 73% of bus customers in the region, accordingly operates the most routes and buses and serves the most stops of any single agency. However, the local operators in Maryland and Virginia also offer significant service coverage across routes that are meant to ensure broad resident access to public transportation. Each agency service is designed differently based on its community's needs. One note regarding the bus stops, many of these stops are shared between 2 or more operators, and they're double counted here. So if you sum up these numbers, it'd be over 21,000 stops in the region, which is not the case. But the amount of unique bus stops is several thousands less. That number is still a bit vague. And I know across the region, there are efforts to kind of clarify a lot of the bus stop data that we have. So hopefully with the 2026 version, we'll have a more finite number on that. But, you know, just as kind of a window into what I'm talking about, for Metro, you know, this quotes 7,559 stops. However, of those, 2,588 are shared with other operators across the region. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Van Gogh in Charles County, Maryland, which only shares 2 of its 359 stops. So, you know, we'll see how the final numbers kind of shake out for everyone. Next slide, please. So this, sticking to local bus assets and community impacts, as I mentioned earlier, the report helps feature how local jurisdictions are acting on TPB goals. Here you see the aggregate shares of zero and low emission buses in transit fleets across the region, and aggregate regional total shares of stops with shelters and stops shared by multiple operators. The fleet statistics reflect on how far we've come making buses more environmentally friendly for residents. And the bus stop numbers demonstrate how localities are making our communities more livable and connected. The details underlying the broad ranges that you can see in each of these boxes between the different agency level numbers underscores how implementation is very much a work in progress and acted on differently depending on a jurisdiction's resources and priorities. You know, for instance, with the stops with shelters, I believe almost every jurisdiction has a bus stop program that on an annual basis is investing on the maintenance and expansion of bus stop amenities. However, some of that, many times that money can kind of get stuck just on maintenance and not necessarily expansion, so you don't see the number growing. But that could obviously vary with funding year to year. Next slide. Now moving on to part 2 of the report, focused on agency-specific content. So this is an example of the redesigned 2-page profile spread that includes both broad calendar year operational data and activity highlights, as well as an expanded performance analysis section integrating 3 times as many metrics as we had featured last year. And those are the new ones are featured here in that blue call box on the right. And this is now where we're kind of weaving in this presentation with the DMV Moves Service Guidelines Performance Metrics presentation before this one, where when Jordan was talking about the performance metrics getting reported in the State of Public Transportation report, this is one way that that will be done. So at an agency level, the metrics will be included in each agency's profile, and then at the network level, any reported metrics would be reported in part 1 for the network summary. And some of the metrics that are going to be included this year, or the new metrics that will be included this year, are total vehicle revenue miles, total passenger miles traveled, passengers per vehicle revenue mile, total vehicle revenue hours, operating costs per vehicle revenue hour, and passengers per vehicle revenue hour. The reason that these specifically are being incorporated because they are commonly used in cited transit performance metrics that agencies already publish on their own, or provide the information to the NTD for publication in that venue. And additional context will be provided in the text boxes that you see here next to each of the charts to inform readers on the significance of the data. One thing we've heard a lot of, and again was alluded to or mentioned in the previous presentation, is the need for context and for folks who may not necessarily be as familiar with a lot of these metrics, you know, a way to understand what these numbers actually mean without necessarily having an impulsive reaction where if a number seems low, thinking, oh, this is a failure. It's like, not necessarily, right? Then that might not be what it means. It actually might be good. Who knows? So yeah, we're really happy with how this looks so far. And I'm very happy with how it looks. So next slide, please. So as referenced by our tech committee chair, Malif, this is the agency revenue chart. This shows where the revenue received by every transit agency based in the National Capital Region comes from. The numbers are a sum of revenue funding used for operations and capital expenses. Two standout observations are that first, directly generated revenue, which appears here in green on the left, the far left side of the bars. And you know that includes things like ad revenue, fare revenue. They make up a very small share of everyone's revenue, not even reaching 20% for any of the agencies in fiscal year 2024. On the other hand, local and state funding, which kind of start at the far right and move inward, the blue and orange bars, excuse me, those make up the vast majority of revenue sources almost across the board. Some agencies have also benefited significantly from federal funding, which is that it's supposed to be more Navy, but the black bars there in on the left-hand side. And you know, some of the agencies for which that is most important is Frederick County, Charles County, and Prince George's County, which receive a lot of federal pass-through funding through the MDOT MTA, as well as discretionary grant funding for capital expenses, such as the low and no emission grants and other grants for new facilities. The report will include more details about this data, including how the revenue is distributed between operations and capital needs, as well as what the regional averages are for each category of revenue type. Next slide, please. So part 2 through effectively part 5 are much more qualitative in nature and well, part 2, and get to kind of give each agency an opportunity to highlight what they want to feature in the report. So a lot of this information is sourced directly from, most of it is sourced directly from agencies through the questionnaire that we send out every year for them to complete, asking them about the past calendar year's activities, accomplishments, challenges, what have you. And so for the agency profiles, we just typically feature a few bullet points and then keep the meat of the content for part 5 of the report. And so here you see a snapshot of some of the highlights, obviously not comprehensive, not for not everyone's, but you know, in Arlington County in 2025, they were the first agency jurisdiction in the region to deploy cloud-based transit signal priority. And Frederick County is one of those services which has actually seen a significant growth in ridership post-pandemic. And part of that is due to being fare-free and their network redesigns. Loudoun County began its fare-free local service last year. Ride-On celebrated its 50th anniversary, and Van Gogh completed the planning and design for its new transit facility, which is something they've been waiting on for a while. Next slide, please. And then just summarizing parts 3 through 4, again, kind of focusing on partner activities, more in-depth agency summaries. Fairfax City Q, they began an update of their transit development plan, which I believe effectively has been completed already in 2026, but we're still talking about last year. Loudoun County began its microtransit pilot last summer in the Leesburg area, which has proved to be a big success for them, and they are now expanding into a new region, but you'll find out about that next year. MTA published the MARC Growth and Transformation Plan. MVTC is continuing its work on the Envision Route 7 BRT program, and VRE also approved its Long Range System Plan 2050. Next slide, please. And we did a lot. TPB activities last year, which many of you were very familiar with or were involved in. Approval of the region's new Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Visualize 2050, as well as the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. All the work we've done with DMV moves, approval of new transit asset management targets and transit safety targets. And then finally, the Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee, which met 8 times last year. And had a lot of presentations featuring work from the various member agencies, as well as we had an international presentation from Transport for London last year as well, and other agencies from across the country. And so to wrap up, next slide, please. Remaining work to do is to essentially complete the drafting of the report and then distribute it back to the subcommittee members for their feedback. The goal is to publish this report and have it on the COG website by the end of the month, perhaps with a plus or minus 1 week deviation. And throughout the fall, what we're going to be working on is trying to stand up something that we've discussed already with our members in multiple meetings, the subcommittee members in multiple meetings, which is a consolidated, more streamlined way of collecting data so that going forward we can have as timely information as possible with as little a burden as possible for our member staffs, which we know everyone's getting a lot of data requests from a lot of different agencies at the same time, and we want to kind of make it as easy as possible for us to have the best data we can for the report. So, and then happy belated birthday as well to Fairfax Connector, which celebrated its 40th birthday last year. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time, and happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Pierre. Do we have any questions? We have lots of time for questions.
Well, I have a couple.
Sure. All right. All right, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Bill Cutler at VDOT. That's a comment and then a question. I want to take a moment to just because you had some progress reported there in some of the last slides, and Fairfax County and Virginia Department of Transportation are making tremendous progress on transforming the Richmond Highway corridor 7 miles long between Huntington and Fort Belvoir. We are heavy into land acquisition, and we're getting ever so closer to utility relocation, and that's going to just be a transformational project for that corridor. It's still many years away from actually buses rolling for that BRT system. But my question is more about an asset that's been developed over the last several years in Virginia, the express lanes on interstate highways. And of course, VDOT is not a transit agency, but we have a very significant interest in the success of transit in the region. We do a lot. And that express lane network, 97 miles, of course, allows for buses to use that, not being tolled. And we're seeing more and more buses. We know there are new routes being developed. There's greater reliability, faster travel times. And I'm just getting this 97-mile network. And I'm just curious if the regional transit report will include, or maybe in the future iteration, can include something to, evaluate that. And it is, of course, transit agencies, but also school buses. I mean, Fairfax County Public School Bus fleet, which is the largest in the United States, is now using those express lanes as well to move their students more efficiently. So just wanted to point that detail out and ask if that could be something that over time could be considered. Thank you.
No, thank you for that comment. I would love that to be part of the report. I definitely think it can be incorporated in the future. It's one idea that we've been floating around now for a few years, and hopefully 2026 will be the year it finally gets in the report, is a visualization that we've seen done elsewhere that shows the regional totals of all the different assets in the transportation, but obviously more so transit network in the region. And so you'd see, you see benches, how many benches in the region, how many shelters in the region, how many, express lanes in the region, things like that. And so that's still a work in progress because it is a significant data haul that not everyone is ready to provide right away. So in terms of the analysis, that is something that we've previously included chapters in the report that are sort of feature chapters, like focusing on a specific topic of interest. So post-pandemic recovery, we've done that. Transit resilience, we've focused on that. So infrastructure, for instance, could be one chapter that we focus on next year. We use as a feature chapter. There are a lot of different ways to do that, but I would love to do that. I think that'd be great. I'm pretty sure we all agree, because the more, again, context in the report for a lot of the information that's in there, the more useful it is. If it's just a compendium of numbers, limited use for everyone. So
Well, thank you.
All right, Mr. Friendly.
I had a question. What you just said, Mr. Cutler, on school buses, is that reflected in the DMV moves? Is it here? Is that something we might work towards, because it does impact the air quality in particular? And I know a number of us are grappling with how do we get to a place where those can be shared assets, not just running on shared pavement, but shared in deeper ways. Kind of a broad question, maybe more for Christy, but how does that fit?
Good point. The TPB's Regional Public Transportation Subcommittee has been solely focused on the public transportation part of it. We have looked at school buses in the context of our air quality planning. Many years ago, I recall there was a specific emissions control program where the state DOTs funded installing particulate matter filters on school buses. So we have done some work in trying to get a sense of how many are there, how many vehicle miles they travel, that sort of thing. But in terms of their operations on the roadway network and its relationship to either congestion or general mobility is something we haven't done. So we'll give it some thought, because I do agree. Particularly in our CMP, we have talked about particularly high school students driving to school as an element of peak period congestion, and so there are some aspects that is related to the broader roadway traffic operations and safety element of it. So
And just might be interesting to consider as a research project or something, even for one small look.
Thanks.
And I'll just add to that that's a topic not necessarily at the let's say K through 12 level, but at the college transportation level that we have kind of thrown around sometimes, whether or not to incorporate those services more into either RPTS or feature in the report, whatnot, because many of those college transit services operate as regular transit services, right? Especially University of Maryland. I mean, they received one of the same grants for their electric buses that all the local agencies compete for as well. So, I mean, they're operating the same type of buses. So, yes, that is something more to consider. Thank you.
Following up on Mr. Cutler's point about the express lanes, which I think is a great idea to try to get a sense of what impact that kind of change in infrastructure has, because then it can help guide what we do in the future. The same, I think, I don't know whether we do this already for dedicated bus lanes, but to the extent that there could be a showing of a tangible increase in usage resulting from a dedicated bus lane, that would help in the ongoing conversation. So I just put that into the hopper as well. I understand why you gave all the warnings up front about this is FY24 data, because I mean, it did make me curious if we were at like 300,000 trips in FY24, and we had peaked at like 400,000 trips. In FY25, do you have any kind of sense of what the data will show? I mean, are we closing that gap?
Significantly, yes. One thing, for instance, with Metro Rail, the numbers in 25 and fiscal year 26, you're going to see those climb significantly because of the return to office mandate. With bus, those agencies that have already had that very strong trend line upward, like Dash, like Frederick County, like Metro Bus, continue to have strong growth in ridership. There are some bumps in the road. For instance, with Metro Bus, after the redesign, there's been a small sort of downtick in ridership, due in part to the way that the redesign impacted which routes would be Metro buses, which routes get shifted to other agencies. Therefore, it doesn't fall under Metro buses numbers. Again, a lot more context to kind of put into the report. But generally across the region, yes, the trend line is definitely still going up.
Okay, and then last data question. It looked to me like the combined fleets of the Maryland and Virginia local were bigger than the Metrobus fleets. They represent 27% of the trips. Is it smaller buses? Is it that they're less full than the Metro buses? What explains a similar number of buses and a third of the number of trips?
That is a great observation. I think Kanti had jump in.
Earlier, Jordan and Eric talked about in the service guidelines, recognizing different types of services. One is connecting communities, lower frequency. Inherent in that is lower demand, but a dependency on transit. For a large service operators such as Metro, not that they don't have such services, they tend to focus more on the heavier routes. So some of the local connectivity and local services falls on the local jurisdictions. So that is part of it. And here is where I'm going to step way out of my area of expertise. There were some FTA requirements on fleet ratios that agencies have to maintain. If you're really operating 10 buses, you can't really have only 11. You may need to have 16 to meet that ratio. So there is something that drives smaller systems to have more number of buses. So it's some of those things play into why the fleet size is comparable, whereas the ridership is low.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, any additional questions or discussion? All right, thank you, Pierre.
Thank you.
Good stuff. All right, so that concludes the meeting. Friendly reminder, we will not be meeting next month. Our September 16th meeting will be back at the COG office. We'll receive an email from Conti with another reminder about that. Enjoy the rest of the World Cup and have a safe and restful summer, and go England. That was on behalf of my wife, who's a Londoner.